Hey guys, Mr. Gucci here. Last video before Thanksgiving break. As promised, I told you guys that if you answered that little questionnaire for today's activities, then I would go through your answers at the end about which dishes in Thanksgiving meals you disliked, and I would talk about them and how you could possibly fix them and make them better. So here are the list of all your responses to what are your least favorite Thanksgiving dishes and why. Let's go through and talk about some of them. All right. Now, I noticed going through here that a common answer that came up again and again and again was cranberry sauce. All right. They don't like the texture. People don't like the taste. All right. Cranberry, cranberry, cranberry. I saw it pop up at least 5 or 6 times. Okay. Now, I'm not sure how you guys are doing your cranberry sauce. A common cranberry sauce is just get the jellied cranberry sauce in the can. You know, you open it up, both sides just pops out a little can-shaped gelatinous chunk. That stuff can be kind of gross and off-putting. I use it for sandwiches, but that's pretty much it. If you don't like cranberry sauce, then I highly recommend you make your own because if you do that, it's very, first of all, cheap. Cranberries are cheap, sugar is cheap, and oftentimes they involve you just buying a couple oranges. Those are pretty cheap. So it's cheap. Second of all, it's really easy for you to control your own sweetness levels. If you want to make a dish for your Thanksgiving meal for your family and impress your relatives and not have to work all that hard at it, I recommend a cranberry sauce. Now, there's two general types of cranberry sauce. There's a cooked cranberry sauce, and it's real simple. You just heat up sugar and orange juice, okay, until all the sugar dissolves, and then you throw cranberries in there. And then eventually the cranberries will absorb the moisture and break down. You'll get this really delicious flavor. Maybe throw some cinnamon in there, some cloves, a little bit of spice you can mess around with. If you think cranberry sauce is too sweet, add less sugar. All right. Start it off maybe adding a bit less sugar than you normally would. Taste it when you're done. If it's not sweet enough, then heat up a bit more orange juice with a bit more dissolved sugar, and then just mix it in. Okay. Another way to do cranberry sauce is a cranberry relish. The difference here is that in a relish, you don't cook the cranberries. You take raw cranberries and you just food process them up with a bit of diced apple, some diced orange. Some people even add some diced nuts as well. And that's delicious. That's the traditional cranberry sauce that we have in our family. It's a cold relish made from dicing cranberries and mixing them with apples and stuff. So if you think the cranberry flavor is too strong, which is totally understandable. Like when you buy like cranberry juice at the store, if you read the ingredients, the first ingredient is usually apple juice. Because if you just got pure cranberry juice, it would be overwhelming. So if you like maybe a little hint of that tart, delicious cranberry flavor, maybe try making one of these relishes and then just add like more apple or more orange and less of the cranberry that you don't, that you think is a bit too strong. Okay. So that's my cranberry recommendation. Okay. I saw in here a lot of people think that stuffing is gross. Oh, stuffing is gross. Stuffing is just wet bread. Okay. Now, what I would recommend is don't make your stuffing inside the turkey. I know that sounds crazy. Everyone, like, it's called stuffing because you stuff it in the turkey. Well, another word for stuffing is dressing. And that term dressing usually comes from people who make the stuffing outside of the bird in a pan. We have a really delicious dressing slash stuffing recipe that my aunt came up with. And it is let me find the recipe here. It is a cornbread apricot stuffing. Now, it's not very moist because it's not absorbing a lot of bird juice. What you normally do is you just mix it up with like a bit of turkey stock. And if you think your dressing or stuffing is a bit too moist, then you would just add a bit less stock. Okay. So there's basically a whole bunch of delicious things that you can do with stuffing. You don't have to use regular bread or regular croutons. You can use things like special French bread, right? You can use things like cornbread. Just mix it up with some herbs, some diced onions, maybe even a little bit of fruit. Stuffing usually has some kind of fruit in there. You don't like raisins? Add apricot, add dried cranberries, all right? It's a really, really versatile way to do things. Every family has their own special recipe for stuffing, and I'm sure you can find one that you enjoy as well. Okay, so another thing that came up a lot is microphone fell. Another thing that came up a lot is a lot of people don't like green bean casserole. And frankly, I totally understand. It's one of my least favorite dishes too. And that's because green bean casserole has its history at a time when it was much, much harder to get fresh vegetables to the table in Thanksgiving. This far after the harvest time, that's why things like squash are so popular for Thanksgiving dishes because they keep for a really long time. So something that you picked in late summer or early fall would still be good in November, right? Green beans were not those things. All of my green beans, they were done and they were dead a month ago. So I have no fresh green beans. But nowadays, it is totally possible to get fresh green beans. So if you don't like a green bean casserole, and again, yours probably looks nothing like this, one of the problems is that people still used canned green beans when it's totally possible to get fresh green beans relatively cheaply. In fact, maybe just skip the whole casserole aspect altogether. Green beans are a traditional Thanksgiving dish, but it doesn't need to be in a casserole. One of the best ways to prepare green beans is just to take fresh green beans, just ones that you get at the store, maybe cut off the tips, and then just heat them in boiling water for like 4 or 5 minutes, not a long time. You know, they're cooked all the way through. It brings out a lot of delicious flavor, but they haven't turned into like that mush that no one likes green beans to turn into. And once you have those cooked green beans, it's really easy to mix them up in some combo, some kind of mixture that makes them taste great. Maybe a little bit of garlic butter, maybe a little bit of vinaigrette. All right, this recipe that my cousin came up with involves mixing the green beans with like a mixture of some vinegar, some mustard, some olive oil, a little bit of sugar, right? Mixing it up, maybe throw some bacon in there. It tastes great. There are much better ways to do green beans. Don't be, feel like you are confined to having to use just old-fashioned canned green beans in your recipe. Okay, so one last one. I see in here that a lot of people are mentioning that they don't like yams, sweet potatoes, or like candied yams, okay? And I think that I understand where you're coming from here. All right, a lot of times when people prepare sweet potatoes, they just stab it with a fork a couple times and throw it into the oven or douse it in sugar. And by the time it's done cooking, you pull it out, and it's kind of just like a gelatinous potatoy mush. There are much better ways to do sweet potatoes as well as other root vegetables as well, okay? And the best way to do it is by cutting them into smaller chunks first while they're raw and then pan roasting them. Put them in a pan with a little bit of vinegar, maybe a little bit of oil, maybe some sugar. It's up to you. Toss them together and bake them as little tiny pieces. The more surface area that you have of the potato exposed to the temperature, the more of that delicious browning you're going to get on the outside. All right. That's a combination of caramelization, all right, and the Maillard reaction, both of which take smaller, basically bland tasting sugar and starch molecules and connects them together in interesting ways, all right? They have a brown color, all right, these new molecules that they form, and they also have much more complex and delicious tasting flavors, all right? So my mother-in-law does a delicious roasted vegetable where she takes all of these root vegetables you guys say you don't like, sweet potatoes, yams, turnips, beets, and she tosses them together with olive oil, some chicken stock, a little bit of balsamic vinegar, some salt and pepper, and she just roasts them. That's it. Just puts them in a pan at 350 degrees, and when she takes them out, they are just all covered in this delicious brown Maillard reaction, and they just taste fantastic. So when in doubt, like if you have like a vegetable that just tastes bland, all right, like a root vegetable, potato tastes bland, just roast it. Cut it into small, evenly sized chunks, like 1 inch cubes are great little bite sized cubes. You want to be the same size so they cook at the same speed. And then just put them in the oven. All right. And that is probably one of the best things, one of the best and easiest side dishes you can do for Thanksgiving. And it's really great. The colors are fantastic too. It looks fantastic. Okay, finally, the last thing that got a lot of mentions was people not liking mashed potatoes. All right. Now, one of the main problems with mashed potatoes that I mentioned in the little PowerPoint that I put up is that people overbeat these mashed potatoes. If you mash these things too hard, you're working so hard to get this really smooth, even potatoy consistency. What you end up doing is turning it into a glue using the exact same kind of reaction that you do when you do the slime chemical reaction. Right? You mix glue and like some borax and water, and you mix it up and it turns into like a slime. That's the exact same thing that's happening here with the potatoes. You have these long starch molecules, but if you mash them too much, these molecules hook together to form longer, stringy, gooey molecules. So don't over mash your potatoes. The second thing that people often do that leads to bland, disgusting mashed potatoes is, I'll be honest with you guys, you just don't put enough butter. All right, you just don't add enough butter or enough salt. So things that you can add to your mashed potatoes to give them a better, richer flavor that's more interesting and less boring. Add some sour cream instead of cream or milk. Right? Add a bit more butter. Maybe before you add the butter, something you can do is you can cook the butter on the stove with a bit of garlic and some herbs. And a lot of the chemicals in the garlic and herbs that give them their wonderful flavor are chemicals that only dissolve in fats. All right, they're non-polar. They are fat soluble. So by cooking like rosemary or thyme or sage or pepper even in and garlic and a bit of butter, it helps draw out those flavors. So that when you mix it into your mashed potatoes, it brings those flavors with it, and your mashed potatoes become so much more delicious and wonderful. All right, another way you can improve your mashed potatoes if you don't like, if you don't like it to be like so smooth and creamy, like it's boring, oftentimes people will include the skins of the potatoes when they mash them, and the skins stick together, and it adds a bit of like interesting texture, right? Like the difference between like chunky peanut butter and smooth peanut butter. Some people have a preference. Okay, so anyways, I hope these tips helped. I'm going to upload this video to our daily review, and I'm also going to post a link here to a family cookbook of my personal recipes that I've been assembling for a while now in my family. So we got some great side dish recipes. Here's how I make my mashed potatoes. They're fantastic. Okay. Here's how we make our stuffing. It's great. These are just recipes that we've tried and been eating for years. So I'll share this with you guys. And if you're interested in having any of these this Thanksgiving or even like, Christmas, I would be flattered. All right. So I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving, guys. Have a great day. Goodbye.